Hey everyone, welcome to week 11. This week we will be talking about various reform movements and religious movements that are happening across the nation in the first half of the 19th century. So during the first half of the 19th century, the United States was overflowing with restless energy and expansive optimism. Confidence was the American creed. America is the country of the future, Massachusetts philosopher-poet Ralph Waldo Emerson observed. It is a country of beginnings, of projects, of designs and expectations. However, the dynamic young republic was also experiencing growing pains as the market revolution widened economic inequality. At the same time, sectional tensions over economic policies and increasingly heated debates over the morality and future of slavery created a combative political environment whose struggles overflowed into social and cultural life. After the Revolution, Americans also became as interested in religious salvation as they were in exercising political rights. The country experienced a theological revolution whereby many people rejected Calvinist determinism. Salvation, they argued, was open to everyone, not just the elect. By this logic, sin was voluntary rather than innate and inevitable. People were not helplessly depraved. They were free agents who could choose salvation and improve themselves and society. These ideas also contained an aspiration toward perfectionism, the idea that people could become more and more perfect by reforming themselves and society. Throughout the first half of the 19th century, reformers fanned out across the U.S. to root out injustice or suffering. The combination of religious energy and intense social activism brought major advances in human rights. It also triggered cynicism and disillusionment. The energies of the rational Enlightenment and the spiritual Great Awakening flowed from the colonial period into the 19th century. In different ways, these two powerful modes of thought, one scientific and rational, and the other religious and optimistic, eroded the Calvinist view that people were innately sinful and that God had chosen only a select few for salvation. During the 19th century, many Christians embraced the more democratic religious outlook that offered salvation to everyone. Just as Enlightenment rationalism stressed humanity's natural goodness and encouraged belief in progress through democratic reform and individual improvement, Protestant churches stressed that all people were capable of perfection through the guiding light of Christ and their own activism. The rise of new beliefs, like the utopian communities created by Shakers, did not mean that traditional beliefs were waning. In fact, evangelism remained widespread. Around 1800, the United States underwent a massive wave of religious revivals called the Great Revival or the Second Great Awakening. The popular religious revivals that swept over the country during the Second Great Awakening added a religious underpinning to the celebration of personal self-improvement, self-reliance, and self-determination. Without religion, revivalists warned, the American Republic would give way to, quote, unbridled appetites and lust. By 1830, the percentage of churchgoers had doubled. While all denominations grew as a result of the Second Great Awakening, the evangelical sects, Baptists, Methodists, and Presbyterians, experienced explosive popularity. In 1780, the nation had only 50 Methodist churches. By 1860, there were 20,000, far more than any other denomination. The percentage of Americans who joined Protestant churches increased sixfold between 1800 and 1860. The Second Great Awakening involved two centers of activity. One developed among the New England colleges that were founded as religious centers of learning, then spread across western New York into Pennsylvania and Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. The other center emerged in the backwoods of Tennessee and Kentucky and spread across rural America. Both phases of Protestant revivalism shared a simple message. Salvation is available not just to a select few, but to anyone who repents and embraces Christ. Among the established denominations, Presbyterianism was entrenched among those with Scots-Irish backgrounds, from Pennsylvania all the way down to Georgia. They united with Congregationalists due to an overall agreement on theology and were able to form unified congregations. The result, through much of the Old Northwest, that is Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois, was that New Englanders became Presbyterians by way of the Presbygational churches. Frontier revivals during the Second Great Awakening were dominated by Baptist and Methodist factions. There were Primitive Baptists, Hard-Shell Baptists, Free Will Baptists and Methodists, Particular Baptists, and many others. The Second Great Awakening also spawned new religious groups. The Burned Over District in New York gave rise to several movements, the most important of which was Mormonism. Its founder, Joseph Smith Jr., was the child of intensely religious Vermont farm folk who settled in the village of Palmyra in western New York. The Second Great Awakening illustrated how the end of governmental support for established churches promoted religious pluralism. Competition among religious groups kept religion vibrant and promoted the emergence of new denominations such as Mormonism. The revivals also broke down conventional social barriers. Free African Americans were especially attracted to the emotional energies of the Methodist and Baptist churches, in part because many white circuit riders opposed slavery. African American Richard Allen, a freed slave in Philadelphia, claimed in 1787 that, quote, "There was no religious sect or denomination that would suit the capacity of the colored people as well as the Methodist," end quote. Yet racial tensions increased as mostly white Methodist congregations required blacks to sit in designated pews. Such discrimination led Allen and others to found the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in 1793. In 1816, as the racial discrimination continued, Allen helped found a new denomination, the African Methodist Episcopal, or AME, Church. The denominations grew quickly. By 1846, it boasted 296 churches, almost 200 ministers, and 17,375 members. During the 19th century, AME extended its outreach, initiating the first civil rights movement and promoting economic and educational opportunities for people of color. Allen University in South Carolina is named in honor of Richard Allen, for example. In 1842, the United States was awash in reform movements led by dreamers and activists who saw social injustice or immorality and fought to correct them. Reformers tackled wide-ranging issues, including living conditions in prisons and workplaces, care for the disabled, temperance, women's rights, and the abolition of slavery. That these reformers often met resistance, persecution, violence, and even death testify to the sincerity of their convictions and the power of their example. As Emerson said, quote, "Never mind the ridicule, never mind the defeat. Up again, old heart, for there is victory yet for all justice." The Temperance Crusade was among the most widespread of the reform movements. Many people argued that social problems were rooted in alcohol abuse. William Cobbett, an English reformer who traveled in the United States, noted in 1819 that one could, quote, "go into hardly any man's house without being asked to drink wine or spirits, even in the morning," end quote. In 1826, a group of ministers in Boston organized the American Temperance Society, which sponsored lectures, press campaigns, and the formation of local and state societies. The American Temperance Society directed its efforts to redeeming not only habitual drunkards, but also the occasional drinker. This alienated many moderate drinkers and caused them to stay out of the temperance movement. As your book points out, quote, "Many Americans saw the reform impulse as an attack on their own freedom. Drinking was a prominent feature of festive celebrations and events like militia gatherings. Taverns were popular meeting places for working men in early 19th century towns and cities, sites not only of drinking, but also of political discussions, organizational meetings, and popular recreations," end quote. I'm going to talk about some institution building and reforming institutions in our next part of our video.